Every single thing we navigate, whether it's deciding on a new personal project or, launching a complex business initiative, it comes with an element of risk. We sort of feel it constantly, often without consciously labeling it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the burning question, and one I often grapple with. How do you genuinely know if you're prepared for what might come, or if you're just, hoping for the best?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? That line between calculated confidence and maybe blind optimism can be incredibly thin.
Yeah.
And understanding where that line lies is just crucial to preventing unnecessary losses, both big and small.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're unpacking Guy Lakeman's insightful, a brief outline of risk strategy and all its accompanying materials.
Right.
Our mission, to cut through the, let's say, information overload and arm you with a structured, clear approach to understanding, assessing, and, ultimately conquering risk.
We'll explore core definitions, look at risk from an evolutionary perspective, break down practical frameworks, and even venture into the cutting edge of how machine intelligence is kind of revolutionizing risk abatement.
Ultimately, this isn't just about avoiding problems, is it? It's about gaining the confidence to navigate life and any endeavor without unnecessary loss, moving you from just reacting.
Yeah, from a reactive stance
to a proactive, truly informed position. So let's unpack this.
Okay, so what exactly is risk beyond just, a vague sense of danger?
Right.
Guy Lakeman offers a surprisingly precise core definition.
Which is?
The quantity associated with a non-desirable or non-productive outcome due to an activity, action, or inaction, or counteraction. It quantifies the potential for loss.
Okay, non-desirable or non-productive outcome. What's powerful about that definition isn't just its precision, maybe, but how it shifts our focus. It's a lot more specific than, say, a standard dictionary definition.
Right, which usually just says something like exposure to the possibility of loss, injury.
Yeah, or adverse circumstance. Lakeman hones in on the quantifiable potential for a non-productive outcome that forces us to ask, what could actually stop us achieving our goals?
Exactly.
That subtle shift, it feels like it could reveal entirely new kinds of risk we might otherwise just miss.
And this focus on non-productive outcomes leads us straight to Lakeman's foundational principle, avoidance.
Avoidance, okay.
He emphasizes that the first and foremost plan is to avoid risk in the first place. If you find yourself in a risky situation, the immediate, almost existential question should be, why are you there?
He doesn't pull any punches either. He advises very directly, don't go there, or even quite bluntly, to get the F out of there.
Yes.
If the cost to eliminate the risk, like building a fence or a wall, isn't feasible, or if it faces, and I quote, persistent, violent, oppressive opposition.
Yeah, and it gets really interesting when he talks about cost.
Right, because it's not just financial.
Exactly. It includes the cost of personal and environmental resources for long-term sustainability. So it's not just about your wallet, but your well-being, the health of your environment, too. It's broader.
His most provocative insight, maybe for me, is his strong assertion that humans themselves, including those of us assessing risk, are one of the highest risk factors. That's quite a statement.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? Even the best frameworks can crumble if we don't address our own biases, our flawed judgments, head on.
And he specifically calls out types of people to avoid.
He does. Those who say nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah.
Because they tend to let risks just pile up.
Right.
And those with a wait-and-see attitude who he says are definitely to be avoided. Exclamation marks included.
So his advice is pretty direct. If you want to succeed and survive, you're either lucky or have done your homework.
That sums it up pretty well.
And that homework is what we're getting into right now.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, risk assessment isn't some new thing invented for boardrooms or, project managers. Lakeman sees it as the oldest evolutionary process.
Oldest evolutionary process? How so?
Well, think about it. Every living organism, from a simple single-celled animal moving away from, say, a harmful chemical or heat, to plants adjusting their leaves to avoid sun or wind damage, and even animals like us, humans, learning to avoid conflict or danger. We've all developed mechanisms to avoid annihilation.
That makes perfect sense. It's just ingrained in us.
Exactly. And he ties this directly to strategy, saying that risk is closely aligned with strategy, as strategy is generally aligned to avoid risk, or should be.
So it's not just about business planning, it's fundamental survival and thriving.
Precisely. And speaking of structured approaches, there's the internationally recognized ISO 31000 framework.
Ah, yes, ISO 31000.
It provides a clear definition of risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives.
The effect of uncertainty on objectives. Okay.
And this definition is quite comprehensive because it clarifies that uncertainties include events and uncertainties caused by ambiguity or a lack of information. And notably, it also includes both negative and positive impacts on objectives.
Oh, that's interesting, including positive impacts. That reframing is really powerful. It makes me wonder, how often do we or organizations miss out on opportunities because we only focus on the negative side of risk?
That's a great point. We focus so much on downside prevention that we might miss the upside potential hidden in uncertainty. And ISO 31000 gives a prioritized list for dealing with risk.
Okay, what's the hierarchy?
First, and ideally, is avoiding the activity altogether. Can you just not do it?
Right, the simplest solution.
Then, considering accepting or even increasing the risk if it presents a clear opportunity.
Ah, okay, leaning into it sometimes.
Exactly. Next, you think about removing the risk source, changing the likelihood of it happening, or changing the consequences if it does happen.
Mitigation strategies.
Right. And finally, you consider sharing the risk contracts, insurance, or retaining it by informed decision.
Meaning you accept it and plan for it.
Yes. You know it's there, you've weighed it, and you decide to hold on to it, maybe budget for it.
What's striking about the ISO framework, reading through it, is its emphasis on principles that go beyond just checklists. Like, it stresses that risk management should always create value.
Yeah, not just be a tick box exercise.
Right. It's meant to be a tool for growth.
Hmm.
And crucially, it must explicitly address uncertainty, acknowledging that not everything is, black and white.
These aren't just rules. They're fundamental shifts in mindset, really, for approaching any kind of endeavor.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork for what risk is, why it's so fundamental, evolutionary even. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. How do you actually identify and measure these risks in a concrete way?
Before anything else, you have to establish the context.
Context first, define the boundaries.
Exactly. Define the boundaries and conditions of your area of interest, your project, your business unit, whatever it is. Identify who the stakeholders are and set the groundwork for how you'll evaluate risk later.
Makes sense. You need to know what game you're playing first.
Precisely. Once that context is clear, then you can move into identification. And there are several methods.
Okay, like what?
You can use an objectives-based approach. So looking for any event that might endanger your specific goals, or scenario-based. You imagine different potential futures, different scenarios, and identify events that would trigger the undesired ones.
Kind of like what-if planning.
Exactly.
Right.
Then there's taxonomy-based identification. This uses a categorized breakdown of possible risk sources, almost like a pre-made checklist, maybe tailored to your field.
Okay. Drawing on known categories.
And related to that is common risk checking, where you apply industry-specific known risk lists. You're tapping into collective experience there.
Leveraging what others have learned, basically.
Right. And finally, risk charting. This is more visual. A matrix approach combining resources at risk, potential threats, modifying factors, and the desired consequences you want to avoid. It gives you a kind of map of potential problems.
Lots of ways to find them. So once risks are identified, what's next?
Assessment.
Assessment, yes. And this often relies on a key formula, composite risk index, impact of risk, event X probability of occurrence, impact times probability. Sounds simple, but how do you measure impact?
Lakeman outlines 4 priority effects. Catastrophic.
Mission failure, game over.
Pretty much. Then critical, indicating severely degraded performance.
Bad, but maybe recoverable.
Then marginal, which degrades follow-up activities.
Knock-on effects.
And finally, negligible, for minimal operational impact. Annoying, perhaps, but not system-threatening.
Okay, catastrophic, critical, marginal, negligible. And what about probability?
He provides clear categories here, too, ranging from frequent, like 71 to 100% chance.
Very likely.
Down to impossible, meaning 0 to 20%.
Right.
There's also probable and improbable in between. The key isn't memorizing exact percentages necessarily,
Right.
but understanding how to consistently categorize the likelihood to feed into that risk index calculation.
So if you have a, say, high probability, high impact risk.
Right. That could result in a high factor, maybe 400 using a scale, like a frequent probability times a catastrophic event. Compared to a low probability, low impact risk, maybe an impossible probability times a negligible impact, giving you a factor of just 20. It's about systematically evaluating how often something could happen and how bad it would be if it did.
It gives you a way to prioritize.
Exactly. And Lakeman doesn't just leave it at abstract categories. He applies these impact levels to concrete areas like performance, support, cost, and schedule.
Ah, okay, so making it practical.
Very. For instance, he gives example monetary thresholds for cost impacts. A catastrophic cost impact might be defined as, say, greater than $500,000.
Whereas negligible might be.
Maybe less than $1,000.
Yeah.
Again, these aren't magic numbers for your specific project,
Sure.
but they show how to make the qualitative aspects of risk, how bad is it,
Yeah.
quantifiable, so you can actually make informed decisions based on data, not just gut feeling.
Okay. Identifying and assessing risk is one thing, but the real challenge, and maybe where the confidence truly comes from, is knowing what to do with that information. What are the approaches?
Lakeman outlines a clear hierarchy, a spectrum of risk management approaches. At one end, you've got reacting to problems after they hit.
Crisis management.
Yeah, or firefighting, as he calls it. Very reactive.
Not ideal.
Definitely not. Moving along the spectrum, you have fix or failure, which is about detecting issues and reacting quickly. A bit better, but still reactive.
Okay.
Then risk mitigation, which involves forward planning and resource allocation to lessen the impact if a risk occurs. Getting more proactive now.
Right, trying to soften the blow.
Then prevention, which focuses on identifying risks and actually stopping them before they ever become problems.
Better still.
And the ultimate goal, according to Lakeman, is elimination of root causes. Getting rid of the underlying conditions that allow the risk to exist in the first place.
So always aiming to move up that ladder towards prevention and elimination.
That's the goal, absolutely. Moving from reactive firefighting towards proactive root cause elimination.
And when it comes to the practical strategies for treating those risks you've identified and assessed,
there are 4 major categories, often summarized by the acronym ACKT.
ACKT.
ACAT. Avoidance, which we talked about. Eliminate, withdraw from, or simply don't get involved.
Just say no.
Pretty much. Reduction, optimize, or mitigate the risk to lessen its impact or likelihood.
Make it smaller or less probable.
Sharing, transfer the risk.
Yeah.
This is where things like outsourcing or insurance come in.
So you're moving it off your plate, partly.
And retention, accepting the risk, and actively budgeting for its potential impact, making an informed decision to hold on to it.
So avoid, reduce, share, retain, ACT. It's like a toolkit for deciding how to handle each risk.
Exactly. Think of it as a checklist for how you plan to tackle each identified risk on your list.
And within abatement, actually doing something about it, can we break it down into specific areas?
Yes, we can look at specific areas. For performance risk, abatement might mean engaging the best design team you can find, using robust modeling and mature tools, and doing extensive testing.
Quality inputs, quality outputs.
Right. For cost risk, it involves using life cycle cost methods looking at the total cost over time, not just up front.
Important distinction.
Focusing on the key cost drivers and maximizing the use of commercial off-the-shelf, or COTS, components where possible to reduce that expensive custom development.
Okay. What about schedule? Always a tricky one.
For schedule abatement, it means things like early project organization and staffing, developing a formal master schedule, and really focusing on the critical paths, those sequences of tasks that directly determine the project's end date.
Gotcha. And administration.
Administration abatement is about keeping documentation current and, crucially, having a defined set of alternatives ready. Plan B and Plan C. So you're not caught completely off guard if things go sideways.
Having backups. So the source also gives some concrete tactics for controlling common risks, like feature creep.
Yeah, exactly. For feature creep or gold plating, where unnecessary extras keep getting added.
Scope creep's cousin.
Right. The advice is to use customer-oriented practices, scrub requirements, rigorously really challenge if every feature is essential time box development into fixed periods, and design for change from the start.
Makes sense. What about optimistic schedules? Everyone's been there.
For optimistic schedules, employ multiple estimation practices. Don't just rely on one. Engage in principled negotiation with stakeholders to set realistic timelines. Don't just accept impossible deadlines.
Easier said than done sometimes.
True. And use incremental development, break the work into smaller, manageable chunks with their own timelines.
And weak personnel. That sounds harsh, but it's a real risk.
It is. The emphasis is clear. Staff with top talent if possible. Ensure early recruitment so you're not scrambling. Provide thorough training.
What about friction between developers and customers?
To avoid developer-customer friction, establish a clear line of command. Basically, prevent direct developer-customer decisions that can lead to misunderstandings or unauthorized scope creep. There needs to be a defined channel.
Okay, that structure makes sense. Now, you mentioned insurance under sharing risk, but Lakeman has a very strong stance on it.
He does. It's incredibly provocative. He basically says the concept of requiring insurance for failure should never be a factor for business.
Never. In a world where risk transfer through insurance is just standard practice, what's the logic?
His view is that requiring non-complete insurance that doesn't cover everything basically is a direct indication of a potential failure that should be avoided.
So needing insurance points to a flaw.
That's how he frames it. He suggests that if a business needs insurance for its core operational failures, it implies a fundamental flaw in its planning, its execution, its whole model.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement. It really emphasizes self-sufficiency and thorough preparation over relying on that safety net.
Absolutely. It suggests that if you're truly prepared, if you've done your homework, as he says, then insurance for operational failure should ideally become, well, superfluous.
A very different perspective. Okay, so we've covered the fundamentals, assessment, treatment. Now let's dive deeper into some of those specific risk areas that often trip up projects and endeavors. First, project size risk.
Right, and Lakeman is characteristically direct here. Size, IS important. Big IS bad. Again with the exclamation marks.
Okay, so size matters. Why is big bad?
The recommendation is to break large projects into smaller units in completion phases. He actually calls this his Lakeman bubble theory.
Bubble theory. Interesting name. How does that work?
The idea, as I understand it, is that by containing parts of a large project within these smaller bubbles, you limit the surface area for risk. It's easier to manage, easier to contain problems if they arise within one bubble.
Makes it more agile, maybe?
Exactly. And this all relies heavily on having a detailed, clearly defined requirements definition document, the RDD. That comprehensive blueprint is critical, especially if you're breaking things down.
And what are the red flags for size risk?
High-risk indicators include an estimated size that seems suspiciously low, or a high number of projected changes, either before you start or expected after delivery. Both suggest the scope isn't really under control.
Okay. Next up, business impact risk. This sounds serious.
It is. This is all about understanding the potential risks related to that classic triangle. Time, cost, quality.
Right.
Examples include a project having a high effect on company revenue, or maybe low visibility of the project to senior management, which can be dangerous if things go wrong.
They get blindsided.
Exactly. Or significant costs tied to late delivery or a defective product. These are the risks that really hit the bottom line and can potentially jeopardize the entire enterprise.
Gotcha. Then there's customer-related risk. You mentioned difficult customers.
Lakeman describes a bad customer as a significant threat. And he lists high-risk behaviors.
Like what?
Like a customer not having a solid idea of their own requirements, or being unwilling to participate in essential meetings or reviews, or maybe not being technically sophisticated enough to understand the product area they're asking for.
So misalignment or a lack of engagement.
Right. And his advice here is quite stark again. Difficult customers are to be avoided and kindly referred to your competition or advised to go walk in the wilderness.
Wow. Refer them to the competition.
That's what he says. And if they need education to become a good customer, make sure it's chargeable as a clearly defined contractual part of your standard terms and conditions.
Okay, so protect your resources, protect your time, vet your clients.
That seems to be the message. It highlights the importance of that relationship up front.
Moving on, process risk. This covers both the process itself and the technical side.
Yes. If your design process is ill-defined, if analysis, design, testing are all just done ad hoc, then the project is fundamentally at risk.
So lack of structure is the risk here.
Exactly. This means things like lack of management support for using standard processes, or no written design process actually documented, or an absence of formal technical reviews.
No quality checks.
Right. Or not using configuration management tools to track changes properly. These are often the invisible risks that silently undermine quality and efficiency until it's too late.
Okay. Then technology risk. He calls this one really important.
He says it's probably the most important set of risks in the developing world, and often dangerously pushed aside.
Why pushed aside? Because new tech is exciting.
I think that's the implication. The allure of innovation, the promise of the new shiny thing, can blind organizations to the inherent risks involved.
So what are examples here?
Technology that's new to the organization, even if it's mature elsewhere, requirements demanding brand new, unproven algorithms, interfacing with unproven hardware or software, or using unconventional development methods, maybe AI-based approaches, without fully understanding the pitfalls.
It's easy to get carried away and forget the potential for, well, unforeseen problems.
Absolutely. Next is the development environment risk.
The environment itself.
Yeah, he compares it to a carpenter trying to work with a bent, dull handsaw. A flawed environment is a source of significant risk.
Makes sense. What constitutes a flawed environment?
We're talking about facilities not being available or just inadequate, development tools not being in place when needed or not working as expected, or maybe a steep learning curve for essential new tools that wasn't accounted for.
So you can have the best team, the best plan, but if their workshop isn't set up right,
They're starting at a disadvantage, exactly, which leads nicely into staff risk,
the people side.
which he stresses is of really high importance, assembling a coherent, capable team. Risks here include the best people simply not being available for the project,
Common problem.
or a lack of the right skills across the team, or just not enough people, or high turnover among staff, constantly losing knowledge and momentum.
And he mentions poison centers.
Yes, this is interesting. He talks about identifying poison centers within a team.
Yeah.
This could be individuals who are maybe overqualified on paper but lack practical experience, or those potentially with no morals or ethics.
Oof. Strong words.
Yeah. He emphasizes the need to root them out and stresses that termination is important rather than delay if serious staff risks like this arise. His reasoning is that external conditions will inevitably change, and these internal issues will only fester and become worse over time.
Deal with personnel problems quickly and decisively.
That seems to be the advice.
Yeah.
Don't let them linger.
Okay. Finally, beyond these specific organizational, customer, tech risks, one common pitfall that often derails projects is, well, it's about time itself. Let's unpack the specific indicators of potential schedule risks that Lakeman highlights.
Right. Schedule risk is huge. Indicators include schedules being dictated from above without balance or reality checks.
Unreasonable deadlines.
Exactly. Overly optimistic estimates made early on. Cascading delays where one task slipping pushes back everything else down the line.
The domino effect.
Yeah. Or unfamiliar technical areas simply taking much more time than anyone expected.
But it's broader than just task estimation, right?
Absolutely. The scope broadens to include organizational factors, management issues, customer behavior, even contractor relationships, and personnel factors impacting the schedule.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, management making decisions that inadvertently reduce team motivation could slow things down. Or a customer constantly insisting on new requirements mid-project.
Scope creep again.
Right. Or micromanaging the team. Or even just poor relationships between the developers and management creating friction and delays. It's this whole complex web of interactions that can subtly, or not so subtly, derail a timeline.
It really paints a picture of risk being interconnected across all these areas.
It absolutely is.
Mhm.
Which brings us to something truly thought-provoking. The future of risk abatement and the role of machine intelligence, or MI.
Ah, the MI aspect.
Lakeman presents a really compelling, maybe controversial argument here. He states, machine intelligence is far more capable of risk abatement using linear algebra, polynomial, tensor matrix analysis optimization than any human team can perform.
Okay, that's a mouthful. And a bold claim. Why does he believe MI beats human effort here? What's behind all that complex math terminology?
He argues MI can map out what he calls a multidimensional spider volume of risk components.
A spider volume.
Yeah, essentially, it can analyze countless interacting variables and their potential effects on risk simultaneously. To simplify those complex terms, linear algebra, tensors, matrices, think of it like this. MI can instantly perform incredibly complex calculations on vast networks of interconnected factors.
Things humans just can't track all at once.
Exactly. It can discover optimal solutions, the best way to minimize risk across all those factors, in a way that would take humans, well, ages, if we could even conceive of all the interactions in the first place. Our human brains, brilliant as they are, simply can't juggle that many dimensions simultaneously.
So it's not just about speed, it's about the complexity and depth of the analysis MI can handle compared to human cognition.
Precisely. It's about seeing connections and optimizing across a landscape that's just too vast for us to map mentally.
And how does he connect this capability back to evolution?
He ties it back by reiterating how risk avoidance is fundamental to survival. From the single-celled organisms avoiding danger right up to primates developing complex social decision-making. It's all built on learning, often through reinforcement learning by trial and error.
Okay.
Lakeman then suggests that MI represents a kind of positive evolutionary process toward building a future-safe infrastructure.
A positive evolutionary step. How?
Because in his view, it operates on basic ethics of do no harm, without being clouded by the hundreds of muddy cultural morals which create a dysfunctional society.
Wow. So he thinks MI can be more ethical in a purely logical sense?
That seems to be the argument, that MI, devoid of human biases, emotions, and complex, often conflicting social morals, can make purely logical, optimized, risk-averse decisions that ultimately lead to safer, more efficient systems for everyone. It's a provocative idea.
Definitely provocative. What's a real-world example of this MI risk abatement in action? Something tangible to help grasp this concept.
He offers the example of MI being used in optimizing aquaponic farming.
Aquaponics. Fish and plants together.
Exactly. MI is used there to constantly monitor and adjust factors like nutrient levels, water quality, atmosphere, lighting sequences, all to avoid the risk of plant and fish growth inefficiency or outright failure in that controlled environment.
So it's performing that complex multivariable optimization in real time.
Precisely. It's maintaining the perfect conditions to avoid common agricultural risks and maximize productive outcomes. It provides a clear, tangible instance of MI performing complex risk abatement in a practical setting.
Okay, that helps make it concrete. And to leave us thinking, he poses that rather stark question about the cereal.
Yes. If a bowl of cereal had 3 flakes in it that would kill you, would you take a spoonful and eat it all?
It really makes you stop and consider your own tolerance, doesn't it? And your strategy for dealing with risk. Are you actively identifying those lethal flakes in your own endeavors, or are you just kind of hoping for the best with each spoonful?
It's a powerful analogy for assessing acceptable risk levels.
And that brings us towards the end of our deep dive into Guy Lakeman's A Brief Outline of Risk Strategy. We've certainly covered a lot of ground.
We really have. From defining risk, understanding its deep evolutionary roots.
Right, all the way to applying structured assessment and management frameworks, and even peering into the future with machine intelligence.
And I think the key takeaway is that managing risk isn't just about dodging potential problems. It's really about establishing a foundation for confidence.
Yeah, and sustainable success in whatever you're doing, personal or professional. It's about moving from, as you said, hope to homework.
Doing the homework.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? We really encourage you to try and actively apply these principles in your own life, your own work, because proactively addressing risk isn't just something for giant corporations or super complex projects. It feels fundamental for personal success and well-being, too.
Absolutely. It helps you move from that reactive stance, always putting out fires, to a truly informed, proactive position where you feel more in control.
So, to leave you with a final thought to perhaps ponder on your own after this, given Lakeman's definition that risk is the quantity associated with a non-desirable or non-productive outcome, what are the potential non-productive outcomes lurking in your own life or your work that maybe you haven't fully identified yet? What could you start addressing today to foster your own adaptable evolution and sustainable self-sufficiency?